Okay, today we're going to do Module 4, Lesson 7. Your application problem for you to work on and bring into class in the morning is Mr. Peterson bought a case, 24 boxes of fruit juice. 1/3 of the drinks were grape and 2/3 were cranberry. How many boxes of each flavor did Mr. Peterson buy? Show your work using a tape diagram or an array. Now be ready to come in and share it with your partner, and then I'll pick some to share out. Okay. The standard we're doing is MAFS 5 NF24A. And this is the language for it where it says you can apply and extend previous understandings of multiplication to multiply a fraction or whole number by a fraction. Okay? And basically all this is telling you is that we're going to be multiplying a fraction by a whole number or a whole number by a fraction. Okay? And it's also wanting to show you that, like, a fraction times a whole number, you will get the same answer as the whole number times the fraction. Okay. Lesson objective. Make sure you're copying this down in your notes. It's a level of difficulty 2. I will be able to multiply any whole number by a fraction using tape diagrams. And your essential question you need to answer after you're done with the lesson is, how can I use a tape diagram to multiply a fraction by a whole number? All right, let's get started. Okay. So let's take a look at our first problem here. It says, what is 3/5 of 35? And if you notice over here, I have a set just like we had in the last lesson. And you can see I've got 5 in each row. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. So 7 times 5 is 35. And I've done those in rows of 5. So it's very easy for me to split it up into fifths. There's 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and our last one is 5/5. Now this wants to know, what is 3/5 of 35? Well, I can see that this here would represent 3/5. And I know there's 7 rows, so 7 rows times 3 in a row is going to equal 21. So I know that 3/5 of 35 would equal 21. Now that's how we were doing it in the previous lesson. Now let's see how this looks like in a tape diagram. Now we know in a tape diagram we always want the top to be our total. So here what we're splitting up is 35. Now it says, what is 3/5 of it? Well, just like we did in our set, we're going to split this tape diagram into 5 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we know from our previous lessons, not the one previous, this before, this is actually a division problem, which is 35 divided by 5, okay, which when we rewrite it as a fraction, we know is 35/5. So I know this is 35/5 here, 35/5 here, 35/5 here, and 35/5 here, and 35/5 here. Now, I know 35 divided by 5, which is 35/5, equals 7. So I can double check this real quick because I know each one of these blocks is 7. 7 times 5 gives me 35 again. So I know my tape diagram is correct. Now go back to the question, what is 3/5 of 35? Well, since this here would be 1/5, we know that this would be 3/5. So we'd have 35/5 plus 35/5 plus 35/5. Now I know previously we've been just adding them up, so we could do that because we know 35 and 35 is 70, and 35 would be 105. So this would be 105/5. Now we also know this is, each one of these is equal to 7. So it's going to equal 21. So as you can see, we can use a tape diagram just as well as the sets in order to solve this problem. Now, for the next ones, all we're going to be using is a tape diagram. Let's try next problem. Now, this one puts it in a word problem. It says, Ariel buys 2 dozen roses. Of these roses, 3/4 are red and the rest are white. How many white roses did she buy? Well, here I know it said 2 dozen, but 2 dozen isn't going to give me the number I need to work with. And I know there's 12 in a dozen, so I know there's going to be 24 roses in total. Now, it says that 3/4 are red, so I'm going to break this up into quarters. Now I can already see that in order to solve for 1/4 of the roses, because this is what this would represent, 1/4 of the roses, we'd have 24 divided by 4 sections, and that's going to be 24 fourths. So now we have 24 fourths. And I know 24 divided by 4 is equal to 6. So I know each one of these is going to be 6. Now the problem says 3/4 were red. So I'm going to go ahead and take these 3/4 right here, and I'm going to put them as red roses. And that means the 1/4 that was left has to be white roses. Now the question says, how many white roses did she buy? So Aurelia probably, bought 6 white roses. Now, the labeling of your tape diagram is very important, because if you label everything, when you go back to read the final question on how many white roses did you buy, it's very easy to see which answer it is. A lot of students end up answering the wrong question. They'll answer how many red roses there were instead of how many white roses there were, or back and forth. So if you label the tape diagrams, it will help you make sure you can not have that real simple mistake. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next problem. On this one, Rosie had 17 yards of fabric. So I know this is important, 17 yards of fabric. She used 1/3 of it to make a quilt. How many yards does she use to make the quilt? Okay, so here is my total, which is 17 yards of fabric. Now it says thirds. She used 1/3 for a quilt. So I know I'm splitting my tape diagram into thirds. And it's to find out how much was in 1/3, I would do 17 divided by 3, which in rewrite the division as a fraction would be 17 thirds. So I know each one of these is 17 thirds. Now, I'm going to check myself by adding it up. And I know 17 plus 17 plus 17 is 17 times 3, which 7 times 3 is 21. 3 times 1 is 3, and 2 is 51. So I'd have 51 thirds. Well, I need to know if that equals 17. So I'm going to have to divide that. So I got 51 divided by 3. 3 goes into 5 one time. Subtract that 3. And I've got 21. 3 goes into 21 7 times. 7 times 3 is 21. That's 0. So my math is checked out so far. It's good because I ended up with 17 yards. Now let's go back to the question. How many yards of fabric did she use for the quilt? Well, according to this right here, she used 1/3 right here. This was for the quilt. So I wouldn't say that she used 17 third yards. So I'm going to have to use a standard algorithm and divide that. Well, I know 3 goes into 17 5 times, because it'd be 15. And I have 2 left over. Remember, we don't do remainder 2 anymore. We're going to write it as a fraction. So our remainder becomes our numerator, and our divisor becomes our denominator. So 5 2/3 yards were used for quilt. So Rosie used 5 2/3 yards of fabric to make the quilt. All right, number 4. Now this says 2/3 of a number is 8. What is a number? Now this is be a little tricky here. So what is our total here? It says 2/3 of a number is 8. I don't know what the number is. So I'm looking at 2/3 times some number equals 8. Hey, how about if we use a variable like we've done before? How about 2/3 times, and I'm just going to put n for my number, equals 8. Now, I don't know what this total right here is. This is n, but I do know that this says 2/3 of a number is 8. So I can split this up into thirds. And I know that 2/3 of it is equal to 8. Well, now it's easy for me to see that to be 8, each one of these thirds has to be 4. And that means the last one has to be 4. That means the total, which we have represented by n, would have to be the sum of all 3. So n would equal 4 times 3, which gives us 12. So the number is 12. Tiffany spent 4/7 of her money on a teddy bear. If the teddy bear cost $24, how much money did she have at first? Now this is another one. We got to look at what's given to us. She said she spent 4/7 of her money on the teddy bear. If the teddy bear cost $24, how much did she have at first? Well, first let's split this up into sevenths. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now it says that 4/7 of it here was $24. And that was cost of teddy bear. Now I'm looking, because they want to know how much money did she have at first. We're looking for the total amount up here. Well, I can see by this that $24 is divided by 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, because there's 4/7. So that would equal 24/4. And I know 24 divided by 4 is 6. So I know each one of these would be 6. So if I'm looking for how much money she had at first, I know this is 6 times, and I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 6 times 7, and we know that equals 42. So going back to the question, it says, how much money did she have at first? Tiffany had $42 before she bought the teddy bear. Okay. Now see, in the last two problems, we didn't know what the total was. But what students have a tendency to do is they put that 24 on top, divide it by 4/7, and they'll give that as an answer. But that's not what it's asking for. It's asking how much money did it have at first. So the tape diagram really helps you keep track of that. All right. So As we can see, we can still find a fractional part of a number by using a set, as we did in the very first problem, but the tape diagram makes it a lot easier. Okay, and we're always looking for more efficient methods in order to do our math. All right, well, see you later.